Welcome to Total Spectrum Spotlight, an informative look and an insightful discussion of today's legislative issues and political trends.
Hi, everyone. It's Congressman Erik Paulsen, and thanks for joining us for the Total Spectrum Spotlight. We all know how the pandemic has impacted our entire economy, but it especially took a toll on the hospitality and restaurant industry. So here today to provide a more vivid picture of what exactly the impact has been, joining me is Dwayne Allen, who is the co-founder and the owner of the Breadfruit and Rum Bar in Phoenix, Arizona. He's also a member of the Independent Restaurant Coalition. Dwayne, thanks for joining us today on the Total Spectrum Spotlight.
Thanks for having me, Congressman, and thank you very much for spotlighting this very important issue.
Well, it's good timing, actually, to talk about this issue. I think a lot of our viewers are especially interested in hearing about your personal experience as a restaurant owner. But first, we should give a little bit of context here. You know, the independent restaurant owners around the country, they number around somewhere about 500,000 from what I understand. They directly employ about 11 million people, and they indirectly employ about 16 million people when you factor in supply chain folks and brewers and distillers and delivery truck drivers, et cetera. And in a state like Arizona, that's something like 338,000 jobs, depending on restaurants. And I think in other places like Georgia, it's probably closer to 500,000. And as a personal restaurant entrepreneur or owner like yourself, I understand you probably had your best year in 2019, but then the pandemic hit. And so these are restaurant owners and small business owners that have really struggled now for about a 2-year period from government mandates and dining room closures, mask wearing, proof of vaccination, all those things. And maybe you can talk a little bit about why was the Independent Restaurant Coalition formed and what were the results of some of the federal funding initiatives for the Restaurant Revitalization Act that were created by Congress that came out of this?
Yeah, thank you very much. The Restaurant Coalition was formed as a response to the experience or the impact that COVID-19 pandemic has had on the restaurant industry. The restaurant industry has borne the very brunt of this pandemic. I mean, no other industry rather, has been subjected to the sort of forces from this pandemic in the way that the restaurant business and hospitality at large has been impacted. And so one of the things that was really obvious from the onset was that independent restaurants, small business owners like myself, needed a voice in Washington to really speak to the challenges of that the restaurant business was facing during this pandemic. And so that's the reason the Independent Restaurant Coalition was formed, is to really get to our elected officials and say to them, listen, we can't just ignore what's happening to what is essentially one of the largest employers as an industry across the country. And so it was very important that this coalition was stood up to really echo the voice of folks who just really did not have representation on Capitol Hill. All the other industries, airlines, you name it, have strong representation in the form of lobbyists, and independent restaurants did not have such a voice. And so we're very grateful that the Independent Restaurant Coalition was able to lobby elected officials in the way that they did to create the Restaurant Relief Act that culminated in the Restaurant Revitalization Fund that was included in the emergency funding that was signed into law last year. But as appreciative as I am for that effect, for that attempt, certainly an immense amount of small businesses like my own benefited. But the work's not done. We only was able to provide funding for 1/3 of the restaurants who applied. And so by any measure, a policy that only benefits 1/3 of its constituent is a policy that's a failed policy. So we cannot afford to let this stand. Congress must replenish the Restaurant Revitalization Fund.
Well, and I think, as you mentioned, look, if only 1/3 of the applicants receive the funding, obviously there are competitors or others that were unable to receive any money. So it kind of created an uneven playing field also, right? For those who didn't receive funding, and you had to shut down, the Breadfruit and Rum Bar in Phoenix. But, when a restaurant closes, it's not like you just turn off the lights, right? I mean, you have inventory issues, perishable items, staff to lay off, and continued rent payments, right? I imagine that you have debt yourself.
Absolutely. We've been paying rent since before the pandemic. We haven't missed a single rent payment. And part of that is due to the promise that the federal government made to us in the restaurant business that they would provide support. And so as I've been hanging on, waiting for the appropriate time to reopen my restaurant, we've dug ourselves into a massive hole paying rent and trying to pivot in all the ways that we did. We tried everything from selling our spices, selling our cocktails through online portals and things like that. None of it was sufficient to keep us afloat. But I'm glad you brought up the point of the inequity here. We've got just around the block from me, 2 restaurants who receive monies out of the Restaurant Revitalization Fund. They can afford to pay the wages that are the current rate these days. In 2019, average starting pay at my restaurant for a dishwasher was $16 an hour. We bumped that up to $18 an hour, and we weren't competitive. We couldn't find anybody. We couldn't hire any staff to take care of those responsibilities. Whereas my competitors around the corner, they're paying $22 an hour. And the reason they can afford to do that is because they did receive this funding that was a lifeline. And so it's absolutely unfair for the federal government to let this stand.
And so I think while we're hopeful, obviously, with the pandemic subsiding, or that it's in the rearview mirror with Omicron, we'll never know for sure here for a little while. But patrons are once again dining out in person. But restaurants, as you mentioned, from the staff perspective, are facing some additional challenges. Even for those who are able to open, there are higher costs, there are labor shortages, right? And some of those supply chain issues. Those are factors as well that make it difficult.
Absolutely. The biggest is labor shortage, because it's a very, very competitive market out there, and who can afford to pay the most are the ones who have staff. And for restaurants like ours, we don't have the extra capital that we can allot to payroll. And listen, we're not arguing. We are absolutely thrilled to pay more, for good work. So that's not the issue here. The issue is that we don't have the capital resources because we did not get the support that was promised to us. And so when you look at everything from supplies, the cost of everything from forks, napkins, paper cups, plates, everything that runs a restaurant, costs are through the roof. Chicken is up 40% in Arizona as of last year. And you can imagine, with restaurants having an average margin of about 10%, we just really cannot stomach that sort of increase, that sort of uptick in pricing. And so this is why it's so critically important for us to get the support that we're asking for. And that, frankly, the federal government promised us. I think it was Senator Schumer that said that the $28.6 billion that was initially allotted was a down payment. If that was a down payment, we're standing by waiting for the balance.
Well, and I know it was disappointing to the coalition and yourself, for instance, that the recent omnibus spending bill that was passed by Congress did not include any more funds for the Restaurant Revitalization Act. But I know there are some in Congress that have been advocating for an additional COVID relief package. I think your initiative that you're backing here has something like 300 co-sponsors. I mean, wide support, but is there any status right now or in terms of what the industry is hopeful for or looking for? Because there's a question mark whether that COVID relief package may surface again.
Well, listen, for us personally, I think I've got probably about another 2 or 3 months that I can hang on. I really just can't go beyond that. It won't make sense. We've been waiting for this for funding from this program since last year, so well over a year now. And as you can imagine, to get a restaurant up and running after it's been stagnant for such a long time is a very expensive endeavor. We are part of this community. We have been around for 14 years before the pandemic. We support folks with their families to be able to send their children to school. So many people depend on us, our farming community. We buy chicken, as a matter of fact, from a very small farmer. And it pains me to see that fella had to down a good bit of his flock because the business was just was not there from operators such as myself. And so it's critically important for elected officials to really kind of, pony up and really support small businesses. Everybody talk about their love for small business. Everybody acknowledges that small businesses such as my own are the backbone of this economy. But that's not what we've seen reflected. We've saddled this industry with an immense amount of debt in the form of EIDL loans. And I'll, as grateful as I am for that, this is debt that has to be repaid. It has to come from someplace, and there is nothing in my pocket to really cover that cost. And so it's critically important for the federal government to step in and do what they said they were going to do. When they asked this industry to shut down, we didn't complain. I closed my doors because it was the right thing to do, and I would do it again. But we did that with the understanding that there'd be relief, there'd be some support down the way.
Sure. Well, it's great for you to share your message with us today. And we do hope that you're able to reopen. As you said, you're hanging on for a few months by a thread, but I know that those in the Phoenix area would love to come back to the Breadfruit and Rum Bar. Really, I think continue to be patrons of a small entrepreneurs and small businesses, because as you mentioned, it really is the backbone of our economy.
Yes, absolutely, Congressman. And really, again, I really appreciate you taking the time to shine light on this issue. This is a bipartisan issue. Listen, independents, Republicans, Democrats, everybody across the board is in this same position as I am. So this is not a partisan issue. And why it's so difficult for us to get this over the finish line really does not make sense to me. I think this is a wonderful opportunity for the White House, Congress, and the Senate to really say to the small business community, we care and we're willing to put our money where our mouth is.
Well, Dwayne, thanks again for taking the time to join us today. And for all of you watching Spotlight, thanks for providing us some viewership. And please send your comment and feedback, and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you very much, Congressman. Have a great day.
Sounds good. Thanks, Dwayne.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching Total Spectrum Spotlight. For more information about Total Spectrum, please visit us at totalspectrumsga.com. Total Spectrum, strategies uniquely focused on your success.